So hello, webinar attendees. My name is Marisol Morales, and I serve as the Vice President for Network Leadership with Campus Compact. And we're so happy to have you here on our webinar today. And we hope that you and your families and communities are staying healthy and taking care of each other during this time. First, I'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement. So as a step towards honoring the truth and achieving healing and reconciliation, Campus Compact seeks to acknowledge the traditional native lands on which we stand. Given that we're gathering for today's webinar from across the country and some from around the world, we invite you to acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of the Native people where you are joining us from, and feel free to add that to the chat. I myself am joining from Chicago, which is located on the traditional homelands of the Council of the Three Fires, the Ojibwe, Ottawa, and Potawatomi nations. Many other tribes, such as the Miami, Ho-Chunk, Menominee, Sac, and Fox, also call this area home. The region has long been a center for Indigenous people to gather, trade, and maintain kinship ties. Today, one of the largest urban American Indian communities in the United States resides in Chicago. Members of this community continue to contribute to the life of the city and to celebrate their heritage, practice traditions, and care for the land and waterways. In addition, we also want to recognize and stand in solidarity with those individuals who are continuing to call for racial justice and equitable communities and affirm that Black Lives Matter. We commit to move beyond words into programs and actions that fully embody a commitment to full participation and equity. Again, we're so happy to have you joining for this webinar today titled Innovations for Teaching the Deliberative Experience Online, Our Experiences and Experiments Using Common Ground for Action and Online Conferencing Tools, with our presenters, whom I'll be introducing shortly. I do have a couple of announcements and more of it to just FYI, be on the lookout for. Campus Compact will be announcing at the end of the month or opening up the application process for the Engaged Scholars Initiative, which will be a virtual version of it. And the Engaged Scholars Initiative is a program geared towards early career faculty and community engagement professionals focused on equity, social justice, and community engagement. And there'll be more information online towards the end of the month. There'll be 20 slots available for that particular program. And it's a year-long fellowship. In addition, we are going to be launching an anti-racism community of practice, and that will also be announced at the end of the month, so be on the lookout for that. We'll have limited availability for those slots as well. So now let me introduce our wonderful presenters. First, I'd like to introduce Cara Dillard. Cara is an assistant professor in digital democratic practice at the James Madison University School of Communication, a research associate at the Charles F. Kettering Foundation, director of research for the JMU Institute for Constructive Advocacy and Dialogue, and operations specialist for Common Ground for Action, and a moderator training specialist for the National Issues Forum Institute. Dr. Dillard is an expert in online deliberation, having developed innovative programming curriculum to convene civil discussions using the Common Ground for Action online deliberation platform. Dr. Dillard works in university settings with community organizations to design public engagement processes that help groups address local wicked issues, both face-to-face and online. As a professionally trained facilitator, she has convened and moderated over 100 deliberative dialogues across a series of topics on her campus, in the community, and online. Next, I'd like to introduce Cara Lindeman, who's a professor of political science, public administration at Winona State University. Earning her PhD from the University of Kansas, she primarily teaches courses in public administration in the fields of public service, public budgeting and finance, and public policy. Since 2009, she coordinates the American Democracy Project through initiatives as Economic Inequality, Civic Health, Campus Votes Project, and Deliberative Polling. She also serves as the NCAA Faculty Athletic Representative for Winona State University. Through her work with the Kettering Foundation, she has focused on democratic deliberation and finding common ground across differences. Her primary interest is empowering students as citizens to be active in their community. Next, I'd like to introduce Dr. John Theis, who's the director for the Center for Civic Engagement for the Lone Star College system and professor of political science on the Kingwood campus. He also serves as the chair of the steering committee of the Democracy Commitment. He has been involved in civic engagement work for over 20 years, started the LSC Kingwood Public Achievement Program in 2010, and was one of the founders of the Kingwood College Center for Civic Engagement. He has recently been named to head up a system-level civic engagement initiative across the 6 Lone Star College system campuses by the Chancellor, Dr. Steve Head. Dr. Theis holds a PhD from the University of Arizona, and among his publications are The Institutionalization of the American Presidency, 1924 to 1992, co-authored with Lynn Ragsdale, and Political Science, Civic Engagement, and the Wicked Problems of Democracy. He has received numerous awards and honors, including being nominated for the E.E. Schwarzschneider Award for Best Dissertation published in the field of American politics, Professor of the Year, Governor's Award for Excellence in Teaching, Innovator of the Year, and the John and Sue Ann Roish Excellence Award. Finally, I'd like to introduce Bertus Robinson, who is a specialist in community college civic learning and democratic engagement. Currently, he serves as an associate with the Kettering Foundation and is the Leonora Montgomery Scholar of Excellence at the Melville Lombard Theological School. Formerly, he has served as the Director for Community College Engagement and Campus Compact and the National Director for the Democracy Commitment. Prior to leading community college civic engagement nationally, Bertus was a tenured assistant professor of history and African American studies at Monroe College in Rochester, New York, where he taught web-enhanced, writing-intensive, civically engaged history courses for 10 years. So welcome to our presenters, and I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Marisol, for those really generous introductions. My name is Kara, and I'm going to get us started. And we've prepared an overview or an agenda of where we're headed today, and we will hope to give you some personal and professional experiences on how you can modify democratic deliberation for remote delivery or wherever, however we're teaching, and then hopefully give you some takeaways that not only you can use, but can spark a lively discussion afterwards. So let's get started. Oh, and please, if you have questions or comments, please place them in the chat, and we will be monitoring them and collectively trying to answer your questions the best that we can. So to start things off, I am tasked with trying to introduce deliberative democracy in a time of closed campus colleges and campuses. I always hearken back to the civic mission of higher education, and I just want to acknowledge that we are the day after our biggest national party in the inauguration of President Biden and Vice President Harris. And this morning I was on a call, and one of a dear colleague, Dr. Byron Craig of Illinois State University, shared with us, reminded us of a James Baldwin quote. And it's this: words like freedom, justice, democracy are not common concepts. On the contrary, they are rare. People are not born knowing what these are. It takes enormous and, above all, individual effort to arrive at the respect for other people that these words imply. So when we think of what our purpose or responsibility in higher education to our students, to our campus, to our communities, we go back to a crucible moment, which AAC&U published in 2012. And my understanding is that we will have a reimagination or a resurfacing of these civic principles in our higher education purpose and in our lives. But what our core commitments really are educating for personal responsibility and then taking seriously the perspectives of others. If we look at the dysfunctional, polarized political climate that has been on full display in our country, we know now more than ever, our students need the civic skills in which to moderate and facilitate these difficult conversations. How we do that across difference makes a tremendous impact. I mean, by golly, right? Amanda Gorman yesterday, she was incredible, a 22-year-old phenomenon, right? And the growing gap between our members of Congress, which average 65 years and older, and then our general population, which is at what, like 32, 35, there is this disconnect. And how best can we empower and train that next generation of leaders to facilitate these difficult conversations, not only on our campus, but in our communities? So if we go to the next slide, I do also want to acknowledge that we are in, gosh, the landscape of higher education disruption. I don't know best how to explain the intersection of all these different layers that not only we are experiencing as faculty, staff, and administration, but also our students. The movement of young people to make a difference. If you remember, Circle came out with that poll that said 86% of young people think that they can create change. Now, how best do we do this in a constructive way is that we really empower citizens, or our students as citizens, to evolve and develop the skills in which to deliberate. And actually, even though we are experiencing, right, social and fiscal stress, we are finding more and more that the demand for civic skills and deliberative democracy are at an all-time high. I don't know about you, but I hear, right, messages from my administration which say, how are we best going to recruit? How are we going to retain? How are we going to graduate our students? And it boils down to these skills which students can demonstrate how to moderate deliberative discussions across differences, whether those are geographical, identity, or the like, and come to a shared understanding or course of action. Through our discussion today, we're going to introduce ways in which we have done this. Of course, as you can imagine, we have used what has become common use of the Zoom platform. Many of you also use WebEx, Ring Central, Google Meet, and the like. They're very similar, but we will also introduce an online chat platform called Common Ground for Action. Now, there's not one way to best deliberate across campuses, across the country, across peoples. All we can do is recommend these different strategies to get people talking about their values. You know, I know people are politically divided, but once we talk about the things from personal experiences and our personal stakes, we find that there are values that we share, the safety, security of our family, friends, neighbors, and communities, where we can meet each other and listen and hopefully develop actual strategies and actions. I often think, you know, coming into second semester, it almost seems harder than first semester. And the reason I say this is because we kind of know what to expect in our remote delivery of instruction and education, and it sometimes doesn't seem as satisfying as it should be, right? But democratic deliberation through these remote delivery tools allows us to connect, to create that civic space and that civic community that not only people like me value, but our students and our communities value and so desperately need. So I will just leave it at that, and I will let my dear friends and colleagues share their personal experiences, which are very rich and helpful, and they can explain this much better than I. So thank you. Jay, unmute yourself, please.
There we go. Can you hear me now? Yes? Okay, great. I think Kara hit the nail on the head when she said we need to get people talking. I teach primarily first and second year students in government classes, and the first day I always ask them, who enjoys talking about politics? And out of a class of 33, I may get one or two students sheepishly raising their hands, because young people think talking about politics is what they see on Twitter, what they see on TV, and politics doesn't have to be about that. And it's always struck me in America, we always say there's two things you should never talk about, and that's religion and politics, but yet we live in a democracy. How can a democracy function if we can't talk about political issues in a productive way? So at Lone Star College-Kingwood, we've been doing deliberation about 10, 12 years now. And we've always done it face-to-face. And when we shut down in March and went on completely online, the communications professor I work with and I thought, how are we going to continue to do these deliberations? We had sort of an advantage because in 2017, we were hit by Hurricane Harvey and our whole campus shut down. We were flooded. 4 of our 7 buildings and our entire school, 13,000 students, went online in a matter of 2 weeks. All our classes had to be online. So when COVID happened, we just thought, oh, here we go again, and began our online transition. And most of our faculty, including myself, who had never taught online before Harvey forced me to, knew how to do it, and it wasn't a huge transition, and we weren't trying to figure out how to do the online work. So we were free to sort of think about new ways to incorporate civic engagement into our classes. So that April and May, we set up some deliberative dialogues online. We tried with WebEx, and so we'd have a group of 8, 10, 12 students in a room with a moderator to discuss an issue. Then we tried the Common Ground for Action format, which doesn't allow the face-to-face, but there's instead, it's a chat, which allows you to talk to each other through chatting. We didn't really like either of them. We didn't think either of them was perfect. So we began in the fall, we combined them to do WebEx and Common Ground for Action simultaneously. And this gave us the face-to-face component, but also gave us the benefits of Common Ground for Action. As you'll find out later, Common Ground has some great sort of tools that allows participants to rank their choices, to consider trade-offs. So we set up 50 dialogues, and those 50 dialogues, we ran one for 10 weeks in September, October, and November. We ran one every day. Some were from noon to 2, some were from 1 to 3, some were from 2 to 4. We ran them as late as 7 to 9 at night. Every first-year experience or freshman seminar student participated in one. We did some on America's role in the world for International Education Day. And then I had my American government students participate in them. And what we did, because we'd had a deliberative dialogue program going for a number of years, we had trained moderators that we sort of kept a stable of moderators that could be called on to moderate. And we had 2 moderators for each dialogue. Usually we just use one, but because of the online nature of it, we had 2. One who was in charge of the conversation between students in WebEx, drawing insights from the Common Ground for Action. The second moderator's job was to respond to chats or to questions that students may have had in the Common Ground for Action forum, and also to keep time, to keep these dialogues moving today within our 2-hour limit. It really worked out great. Ever since I started doing dialogues some 10, 12 years ago, I found students really respond to them. And on the next slide, you'll see some of the quotes from students that they wrote in their reflections on the experience. What ends up happening, because students haven't been exposed to conversations about political issues, except in the sort of negative and adversarial framework of contemporary media, Facebook, and Twitter, deliberation gives them a different perspective on how to have political conversations. So out of this, we got 8 new moderators that had participated in our 50 dialogues. We're having trainings for them in the next 2 weeks. And then we'll start another process in the spring of holding dialogues for our students. And with that, I'll turn it over to Virtus.
Yeah, so that was going on in Texas. Meanwhile, we were wondering what we were going to do for Constitution Day in New York. And the reason for that is because most of New York went virtual pretty early. And when I was a professor at Monroe Community College, I remember Constitution Days being like during a college hour, and there was cake involved in the shape of the Constitution, and everyone got a slice, I guess. And there were maybe some quiz shows, and with quiz questions and prizes, and that's about it. So it wasn't impactful, it wasn't engaging, and people just wanted cake. So, and they got little pocket constitutions, and that's all well and good. And it is a federal mandate for state colleges and universities to observe Constitution Day. So because we're going virtual, and a bunch of us were considering doing deliberative dialogues as a way to engage in the issues that were going to be surfacing, and for electoral engagement, we decided that to take this opportunity, because New York is really big. A lot of people think that if you say you're from New York, then you're from New York City or something like that. Well, New York City is about 6-hour drive from Rochester, and it's a completely different community, completely different atmosphere. In fact, there have been a lot of bills to split New York in half, because one half is really blue and one half is really red. So there's a lot of in between, especially when you think about the 60+ institutions in the SUNY system, the State University of New York. So you've got community and technical colleges all the way up to research universities like University of Buffalo and Binghamton University. And they rarely communicate with each other. And the SUNY network has been really doing a lot to try to bridge and try to standardize a little bit. And this was an opportunity to get students together who largely for the majority of that spring semester, and then in the fall, we're going to be virtual, and to engage them in electoral engagement in a way that they have never done before without having to travel, which can be difficult for a lot of students to do. And also there's a lot of cost involved. Well, we decided to do a deliberative dialogue on Constitution Day across the entire SUNY system. So to start off with, we got some key people from the institutions to sign up and to agree that if we're going to spend this type of an effort that we're going to have some students coming. So, but first we got some New York state partners involved. So we got the SUNY office, and more specifically the SUNY Center for Professional Development, and then Campus Compact New York, Pennsylvania. And in fact, their director was a moderator. I was representing the Kettering Foundation, and as well as I sit on the board of directors for the National Issues Forum. And one of the former directors of National Issues Forum is a professor and chair of the education department at SUNY Broome Community College, and has been doing a lot of innovative work with public deliberations for many, many years. So in order to pull this off, there was not a lot of time between at the end of the semester, which is like May and June, to Constitution Day, which is like the second week in September. So we had to keep that in mind, that there wasn't going to be a lot of time to recruit. And so we would love to have a lot of students to moderate, but during that summer, it was hard to gather up students. We gathered up as many as we could, but we put out a call for faculty and staff who want to be trained as moderators for the specific event. And we had about 35 faculty and staff come and into a virtual moderator training in the middle of August. And that was the first time that I had ever trained anyone virtually. And here I was in Vermont, and I was training people across New York with the help of Lisa Straley. And so what we decided to deliberate as a group, we decided to deliberate on the newly released issue guide on voting. So in other words, we are feeding two birds at one stone. We were giving students the experience of public deliberation, but engaging in the election, but not on a specific issue, but on how to safeguard our elections. And so I think we were like one of the first to really do this. But the thing about after we had trained about 30 or 35 moderators and note takers who are predominantly faculty and staff across New York State, then for the event, it was a 2-hour event. We blasted it across all of SUNY. And when everything was said and done, we had about 150 students from across New York State show up. And so we were able to poll because of Zoom. So we used Zoom technology to poll people. So, and that is an example of one of the polls that we gave based on the Civic Health Index. And it was asking, this one was asking, within the 2 years, have you volunteered? And people we were able to see at the beginning, where everyone was as far as civic health was concerned before we actually got into the public deliberation. And on the next slide, before we got into the issue itself, we had to not assume that everyone knows what a deliberation was. So we had to go with, so we had a brief training session, as you can see at the bottom of the screen that's highlighted, that's Lisa Straley, and she is informing them what we're going to be doing that day. We weren't going to be debating, and we weren't going to be having a discussion, we're having a deliberation. And what does that mean, and what are the benefits of that, and what are the skills involved in that? And then at the end of, and as you can see, we were polling throughout. Once we were able to go ready for the deliberation after being set up with the videos and really going through all the 3 options in the NIFI style of public deliberation, we then broke off into about 16 breakout rooms. So we were able to do that with Zoom. So we were able to break them out in 16 breakout rooms with a moderator and a note taker in each one. And each note taker had their own separate Google file. So we were able to see the notes come in as the deliberations were going through. And so I was in the main room and I was shooting out messages like, you have 5 more minutes to deliberate on this. You should be going to, the second option in order to keep it moving. And so by the end of it, we all came back into the room and we talked about our experiences and also what could we live with? It was one of the questions, and also doing a poll on the experience itself. And one professor from the Maritime Academy in New York had said that, before the deliberation, I think that he was not a moderator, he was a participant as a professor. He said that that he had now had a renewed faith in this generation, because before he thought that they were apathetic, they didn't care, and they didn't know anything to really get involved, and that's what he was seeing on media. But after being in the room with students from across New York State, community college students, research students, graduate students, he said, I have a renewed faith in this next generation. And students were saying that, this was the first time that they were able to really have a productive conversation. They were calling it conversations, but they're really deliberating. But it was very productive, and they were able to hear what people were saying from all across the state, which is very different from their own. And we had planned it that way, to make sure that in each group that there was representations, not racially, not age-wise, but institutionally. So make sure that community college students were in the same room with Research One students, with the same room with juniors and seniors and people who are getting certificates. And it worked. Because what happened is that once we were done with that 2-hour session, people start deliberating on their own campuses. And we may turn this into an annual event. So, and even if we are back face to face, this gave more people an opportunity to be involved in a statewide conversation and deliberation, which otherwise they would not have been able to be a part of before. So we're going to continue doing this, and hopefully we will get better at this because this was the first times that we had done something to this scale and scale it up. Thank you. Now I'm going to turn it over to, I believe, Kara Dillard, right?
Yeah, so Virtus makes such a eloquent, it's okay, an eloquent, pitch for taking, what's happening right now, which is the inability to connect face to face, and trying to expand or scale up via your state. What I wanted to talk about and what I've been doing the past couple of years is really scaling up past the state, but really thinking nationally about ways that we can connect college students just in the way that Kara talked about in the beginning, across geographies, across these other kinds of ideological divides, and getting students to talk together. My story starts really about 6 years ago. It was that Kara, who is in Minnesota, and at the time I was in Alaska at the University of Alaska, were learning and experimenting with the Common Ground for Action online deliberation platform. And she and I talked and said, well, why don't we get our students in our classes from Minnesota and from Alaska together in a deliberative forum, and let's see what happens. And here was a really unique chance that neither of us and really had before, to have students talk together about a single issue across geographies, and to talk and see, well, we might be talking about the same thing, but we can have really radically different reactions and experiences and values. But here we can use this online technology and this online opportunity to talk with each other. And so we had, I had, and I know Kara did, but speaking solely for myself, had a really good and really positive response from my students when we did this. They said that it was, and many times the first time that they were able to talk with people really from outside the state about, about these issues. And so it got me thinking, well, what if we could do this beyond just Minnesota and Alaska? What if we could do this beyond that? Could we scale this up nationally using Common Ground for Action to connect students from across geographies? And the way that I thought about it was, wouldn't it be really neat if we could connect students in small group deliberations from rural campuses and urban campuses together? Wouldn't it be neat if we could connect big schools and small schools? Wouldn't it be neat if we could connect religious and secular schools together to talk with each other about whether it's, voting, whether it is fixing our political differences and political polarization, or whether it's guns and mass shootings. And that was really neat. In fact, when I was sort of preparing to do this, I went from Alaska down to the University of Washington in Seattle, and I did something very similar to what Kara and I did. It's Mom, Take Your Child to Work Day, obviously. But I had done using the CGA platform, I had done a very similar forum with a colleague from Texas. It wasn't Jay, on forum on mass shootings. And my student from the University of Washington and urban Seattle, talked to me afterward and says that this was a really transformative experience, being able to talk with somebody from across a difference like geography, because she had never spoken really to anybody who had owned a gun. And being able to talk about why somebody would own a gun, what it means to them, really made her think differently about an issue like gun ownership. And to me, that makes all of this worth it. And so I've been working with NIFI for the past couple of years now. We've been doing this for roughly about 3 years. And what we do, a full week of cross-campus CGA forums. In the fall 2020, so mid-pandemic, we had 27 campuses with about 250 students deliberating together across an entire week, in October. And the wonderful thing about this is that there were students from 3 other campuses who moderated these forums. So it wasn't by old professors like me, but it was peers moderating for peers. And those peers were also themselves in different places. And so what it was wonderful is that they got to talk about voting reform, policing reform, and how different places from urban to rural to big to small communities, experienced something like police violence or the perceived absence of police violence and racial inequities, from issues of how free speech on campus looks like and what the sort of political tenor of everybody's campus was. And so many of the responses of these students were just really thankful and appreciative that they were able to have these kinds of conversations, that they were able to get outside of their own campuses and outside of, perhaps even their own friendship networks, to be able to talk with people who are just in, physically different places, right? In terms of geography, but oftentimes, chose a very different campus life, and so they really got an opportunity to do something different. And as you could see from the comments from students who were able to participate, and most of these were from the week this year, they really enjoyed being able to participate. And the thing that I say about this initiative in particular, and about using Common Ground for Action in particular, is that, for students who are nervous about talking about politics, either because maybe they're just shy, or maybe they're conservative, or maybe they're liberal, or whether they're just worried about being seen as not nice when their campuses have a lot of norms and very strong norms about students being nice to each other and not arguing or being reactive. The way that the Common Ground for Action online platform works is it allows students to really privately think about what are the views that I hold, to rank those choices. And this is a lot what Jay just talked about a few minutes ago. But then in aggregate, they get to see their individual judgments as part of a larger group conversation and not in contrast to that group conversation. And so being able to think of themselves and see themselves visually represented as part of a larger conversation with people from, from those crazy liberals on the West Coast, for example, right? Can be really important in getting students to think outside of their worldviews. And when their opinions change during the course of the forum or during the course of the deliberative conversation, their ability then to register those opinion changes and have it reflect in the group's judgment shows to these students that everybody else is listening to them, that they get a chance to talk to people, and that those people from in different places are actually listening. And sometimes that just basic idea is really transformative. And it's this kind of transparency that means that students often get to directly see themselves as part of a citizenry that can work together. And so we as a group of us, Kara, Jay, and Virtus, have been talking for a while and through these various sort of levels of teaching deliberation and moving it online and trying to give students an online experience to deliberate. We try to think about what have we learned in doing this, either the couple of years that we've been doing this, or just this past year, as COVID has thrown a wrench into everybody's plans. And I think one of the things, and I'll let my colleagues here talk about some of these things as well, is that one of the things is COVID could have stopped people from deliberating. It really could have. As campuses closed, it could have stopped campuses and faculty and staff and centers on campuses and civic life centers on campuses. We could have just shut down ourselves and said, well, we need to think about people's, actual physical health, and maybe deliberation should just not happen until, until some other later date. But to me, the thing that out of this year has really shown me is that we didn't. And students, when given the opportunity to move from face-to-face deliberation or deliberating in person to online, also really gravitated to doing so, and really were excited and really happy with the idea and the opportunities that were given them to deliberate, whether it was just on their campus, like in Jay's experience, whether it was other folks in the SUNY system, in Virtus's experience, or whether it was nationally from students from around the country, that these opportunities were given and students really took advantage of them. There's a couple other takeaways, and I'll let my other colleagues on the panel, while my daughter has tied herself up in tape, talk about some of our other takeaways.
One of the things that I wanted to say was, and this is answering, was it all voluntary? And in my case with the SUNY system, working with the SUNY system, and John Suarez, who was there, who was one of our moderators, reminded me about Peter Sawyer, who was one of the masterminds of that, and he's a community college professor and chair of the department and director of civic engagement on his campus. For us, it was voluntary for everyone that was working on it and the moderators. But in order to get students, when everything was already out of sync with them, to come to a 2-hour online call, to deliberate about the elections, there had to been some incentives, and so we one of the things that we that we connected this, and it was called constitutional connections. And it was connecting the Constitution with voting, with the issue guide, so that faculty can then turn this into an assignment or a part of their curriculum, and that is what a lot of professors did, or gave extra credit or credit to students to participate in this. I can't say that was all of the 150 students that showed up. I doubt it. A lot of them really had a lot on their mind, and they wanted a place that was productive to talk about it. I mean, that was around the time when there was a lot of concern about election rigging and things like that. So it's great to see what are the current issues and to make sure that that whatever issue that you're deliberating is really hot. It doesn't have to be, but people, have that personal stake and are able to talk about it, especially when there's a limited amount of time. So that I just wanted to bring that up.
Yeah, and I would just say, when we did it, all our students, the students that participated were there because they were required to do it for a class. So in my government class, I simply made a reflection on the dialogue and an assignment that they would turn in. Knowing that we tried to pick topics that were very timely. So we did one on the political fix, one on COVID. We did, well, not one, that was one of our topics, COVID-19, policing. So we tried to pick the kind of topics, and I sort of go back and forth whether it's a good idea to require students. I've come down on the side of yes, it is, because I think the primary way they see political conversations happen is so dysfunctional that just seeing a model of where 10 or 12 people can come together and talk about policing and actually hear each other really changes their ideas of the possibilities of political discourse. And I don't think our political leaders have a lot of incentive to change the political discourse because it works for them and they have interests that they want to support and that support them. So I've come to the conclusion, I've actually made all my classes it's required for my classes now.
Just to share what Jay said, I require it for all of my classes and have done for a number of years, ever since Kara and I had that first experience, such a positive experience years ago. And we do like first year experience or orientation all the way through capstone, whether it's like political science classes or general education classes, they are all required to do it. And the tricky part in that is that for when I schedule these sessions, I always schedule an hour and a half, and many times our classes only meet for 50 minutes. And so a lot of times you have to appeal to students' scheduling needs and challenges. But that's what's so nice about what Kara Dillard is offering, these national conversations, is that she sets up a week of deliberation. And so when students, when I offer, like 4 different times, 4 different issues across the semester where students are required to at least engage in at least one, and then reflect and write a paper about that. But if they are unable to meet any of those 4 times, Kara Dillard has a schedule of, so many. And so those students are able to log in with people across the nation. And we did this, I had students participate in this last semester with other students across. And I know for a fact that experience was so transformational that those students are requesting current students to say, yeah, do the ones that are required within the structure of the course, but then also do this additional one in April that Niffy and Kara are offering, because you get a really rich experience to complement what goes on in your own campus or state.
Yeah, and I would also, I saw John Suarez's comment, feel free to beg, to borrow or steal whatever you want. A lot of these materials are free. And I would say one thing that students really liked about this, too often our students are required to do campus events too, and they're typically all one way. There'll be some expert that gives a talk and they sit for 30 or 45 minutes, and then maybe 4 or 5 students get to ask a question. The great thing about deliberative dialogues is that it's not a one-way conversation. It's not the expert telling people what to think. And so it's Democrats, Republicans, liberals, conservatives, all ideologies I found among my students really like it because they're not being force-fed a particular view. They're given a chance to think about and talk about how they think on an issue and what they feel about an issue.
Yeah, and that's the one thing good about the well, as the NIFI issue guides, as well as, like, I'm really interested in the hacking of some of these issues and making them really local and localizing them, which I see going on in Texas and some other regions as well, which is awesome. This goes to an answer to a question about seeing broad perspectives, and those issue guides are created to bring in factual but broad perspectives on an issue. So there's no hidden agenda in these issue guides, as what I'm trying to say. John Swires did say that it's hard to bring people who are used to in higher ed being on the other side of things to say that, deliberative dialogue sounds like, this is a trap. And so sometimes, like, one-on-one or just try it type of thing brings them in. And once they get in and realize that they're, as Jay was saying, that they're not preached at, or they're not trying to be swayed, and that they're actually being heard as well. And also, since they're being heard, they're hearing, because that is one of the ground rules. And you would want that type of diversity and the deliberation anyway. But yeah.
Yeah, and I can even add to that. In 2015, the chancellor wanted the colleges, Texas was considering concealed carry on campuses, and the chancellor wanted some colleges to hold forums. And my president volunteered me to hold the first forum. And it was a politically charged issue. No campus wanted to go near it. I held it as a deliberative dialogue. And we had over 300 people show up, elected representatives, chiefs of police of campuses, because nobody was talking about it. And the night of the event, I noticed these people coming in, and they had little lapel pins that said OCT. And I called my assistant and said, "What are these people with October on their lapels? What is that?" And he started laughing, said, "Those are Open Carry Texas people." I said, "Open Carry Texas?" He goes, "Yeah, it's a gun rights group." I thought, oh no. We had about 80 of these Open Carry Texas people, at one or two at every table. And I was just waiting for a disaster to happen, One of them even recorded it. And on the way in, one of the guys said, "Hey, are we going to be able to talk at this thing?" And I said, "Yeah, everybody will be able to talk." I'm sure he thought a college sponsoring a forum, they're going to tell us how bad it is. But it was really transformative for all participants, because at the end of the event, everybody talked about it. And what they realized was the pro-gun, the anti-gun people all had common ground. They all cared about safety in their community. It wasn't that the other side was evil. They just came to the conclusion that safety was promoted better a different way. And in a sense, that's what we need in our political discussions. We need those people with vehemently differing opinions to realize that the other side is coming at that wants to make the decision because they share some of the same values. And the next day, the Open Carry Texas people posted a video on their website and said, "This was a great discussion. We need more of these." So that's the power of deliberation and getting people to think differently on these issues. And I think we need to work really hard to get more people to have this experience.
Yeah, and Jay, I just wanted to add that, one thing that helps, it's harder to do in face-to-face, and it's a skilled moderator to make sure that people don't talk over each other, but you can't do that in Zoom. So you can only talk at, one at a time. So that in that way, when we navigated to the to online platform, it kind of helped that, one person speak at a time. And also like for the moderators to be able to like, okay, you're talking too much, mute you. No, but that's not a good practice to mute people, on Zoom for public deliberation. But you can also like kick people off too if they're getting a little rowdy. You can't really do that well face to face. I'm joking though, but.
Well, and the reality is, Bertus, it almost never happens.
Right.
I mean, people are respectful in these forums because the ground rules keep the discussions productive.
Right.
And in my experience, just with probably what you might think of as being all the bad parts of, an online deliberative discussion experience with Common Ground for Action, where it's anonymous and you can write whatever you want. And in many ways, it's kind of unmoderated in that fact. I, like Jay and like Vertus, have never had kind of the conversation go off the rails where, people are hurling insults and people are, to use the term uncivil or uncivil. I've always had, in my years of experience, it's always been that people take it pretty seriously, that, the moderator is able to help out when help is needed. But even in the case where people are anonymous, they're definitely still listening and they're definitely still attempting to be respectful of what other people are talking about in our asking and our sharing with each other. The last thing that I'll add, because we're just about out of time, is that there's a series of resources, and I have a couple of them on here. And I think Kara has posted links to some other resources in the Zoom chat. If you're interested in learning more about how to moderate like a online Zoom forum or WebEx or whatever AV tool that you have, the National Issues Forums Institute, NIFI, has a series of resources, from webinars to moderator scripts to helpful tip sheets, available at their website, nifi.org. And there's also other kinds of trainings. If you're interested in Common Ground for Action training as well, there's a website, nifi.org/CGA, that also has resources there to learn how to moderate, more sort of tips and tricks about how to work with an online platform, and so on. So don't think as we're talking, that we're doing this all on our own, that there's a lot of resources available. And just like Vertus says, or Kara says, if any of you have questions, feel free to reach out to any of us and we will shovel information and resources your way, and help out as best as we can.
Great, thank you all so much. We'll allow for any questions if there are any. Folks want to put that in the chat. We do have a minute or two. But as we wait for that, I just want to say thank you so much for this informative webinar. I think, right now we're in a really critical time in this country, and so this couldn't have come at a better moment as we think about the ways to move forward, to create pathways to unity and understanding, and really being able to be a country that works towards its promise for all people. So thank you all for doing the work on your campuses and in your communities, and sharing that knowledge with our Campus Compact network through this webinar. And you can see the emails there. Awesome, so we're at time. Thank you all so much, and until next time, be well.